The scent of roasted venison and spiced wine filled the great hall of Ellenshire, where torches painted the stone walls in gold and crimson. Laughter echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling, but beneath it lingered the silent tremor of expectation. Tonight, Elder Rowan, patriarch of one of the oldest noble houses in the realm, would offer his daughters before the Alpha King of Thornwall. It was said the king sought a bride, and the feast had been prepared as both tribute and opportunity. At the high table sat the elder himself, stern, proud, his silver hair bound in a cord of black silk. Beside him were his two daughters. Lady Alara shone like morning light, her gown of pale blue gleaming with threads of silver. Her every movement drew the eyes of young knights and envious maidens alike. To her right, silent as the moon beside the sun, sat Lady Mira, her younger sister, modestly dressed, her gaze lowered to her hands. Mira had long been called the Forgotten One, the Omega of the household, too quiet to charm, too thoughtful to dazzle. The hall's chatter softened as the herald's horn sounded. His Majesty King Aldric of Thornwall. The great doors swung open. The king entered with a measured stride, his presence commanding even before he spoke. He wore no crown, only a dark cloak clasped with the sigil of his house, a silver wolf over iron. His eyes, sharp and cold as winter, swept across the hall. The air seemed to still around him. He bowed briefly to the elder, who rose and gestured grandly toward his daughters. "Your Majesty," Elder Rowan began, his voice rich with pride, "it is my honor to present my blood, Ilara and Mira of House Rowan. Choose, and she shall be yours to wed." A murmur rippled through the crowd, every gaze drawn to Ilara's poised smile. She rose with practiced grace, curtsying low, her jeweled hair catching the firelight. Mira remained seated, uncertain, her heart pounding beneath her bodice. She had been told her role was only to witness, to be present, not seen. The king's eyes lingered on Ilara, assessing her beauty as if measuring a blade. Then, to the shock of all, his gaze drifted past her, to Mira. Mira felt the weight of it like a touch. Her breath caught. For a moment neither moved. Elder Rowan, assuming the king's pause meant uncertainty, hastened to speak again. "Ilara is fair and strong-willed, my lord. She would make a worthy queen." But the king did not answer. He stepped forward until he stood before Mira's chair. The hall seemed to close around them, soundless but for the crackle of torches. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was low, deep, with an edge that made her lift her head despite herself. "Mira," she said softly. "Mira," he repeated, as though testing the sound. "Do you wish to be chosen?" Her father stiffened. "She is not prepared for—" "I asked her," the king said. Mira's throat tightened. "I was not told I would have a choice, my lord." A hint of something flickered in his gaze, amusement or approval. "Then hear mine," he said, and turned toward the elder. "I choose Mira of House Rowan." The hall erupted in stunned whispers. Ilara froze, her composure fracturing in a heartbeat. Elder Rowan's face blanched, his pride wounded before the entire court. Mira could barely stand as attendants rushed forward, bowing, their movements mechanical. The king's voice cut through the murmurs. "At dawn, we ride for Thornwall. Let preparations be made." He turned once more to Mira, his expression unreadable. "You were not meant to be hidden," he said quietly, "only waiting to be seen." Then he left the hall. Mira's hands trembled as the echo of his words lingered. Around her, whispers grew like a storm, envy, disbelief, scorn. She felt the weight of every gaze, the heat of her sister's silent rage. And in that chaos of silk and candlelight, her life, once small and invisible, shifted forever. If you love stories of courage, heartbreak, and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. The morning after the feast dawned cold and grey, a thin mist curling through the courtyard of Elder Rowan's manor. Servants whispered as they passed, their eyes darting toward the chamber where Mira sat in silence. She had not slept. The echo of the king's words, "I choose Mira of House Rowan," still pulsed in her mind as if spoken only moments ago. Outside her door, footsteps approached. Ilara entered without knocking, her face pale, her voice low but sharp. "Do you understand what you've done?" she hissed. "You've humiliated our father before half the realm." Mira lifted her gaze, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I did nothing," she said quietly. "It was the king's will." "The king's will?" Ilara's laughter was brittle. "You think this is a blessing? He chose you to shame us. A pity choice. You were never meant to be seen." Mira said nothing. The words cut deep, but she refused to let them show. Ilara lingered, searching her sister's expression for some hint of fear, then turned sharply toward the door. "Enjoy your crown of thorns, little dove. You'll find no peace in it." When she was gone, Mira drew a trembling breath. Her reflection in the polished metal mirror seemed that of a stranger, eyes wide with disbelief, lips pale, the daughter who was never chosen, now bound to a king she barely knew. By noon, the courtyard filled with horses and guards bearing the royal crest. The king stood beside his black stallion, speaking with Elder Rowan. Their words were hushed, but their tension was clear. The elder's pride fought against his obligation to the crown. "You cannot mean to take her," Rowan said under his breath. "She is untrained, unready. She will disgrace your name." Aldrich's gaze was cool, unreadable. "Then I will teach her." "My choice is made." Rowan's jaw tightened. "And what of my other daughter? You dishonor her." The king's voice remained calm, yet his tone carried finality. "Beauty untempered by humility brings ruin. I seek something different." He turned to where Mira waited at the steps, cloaked and trembling in the cold. For a heartbeat their eyes met again. There was no warmth in his expression, yet something in it steadied her, a quiet certainty that made her step forward despite the fear gathering in her chest. Her father approached, his hand gripping her shoulder. "Do not fail me, Mira. Whatever shame this brings, bear it with dignity. You are still of my blood." She nodded faintly. "Yes, father." The words tasted of duty, not comfort. Ilara stood by the doorway, her gown glinting beneath the grey light, her smile brittle as glass. "Farewell, sister," she said sweetly. "I hope Thornwall's stones are warmer than our hearth." Mira turned away before her courage faltered. The king extended his hand. For a moment she hesitated, then placed hers within it. His grip was firm, neither cruel nor gentle, merely steady. Without a word, he helped her onto the horse behind him. As the gates opened, the crowd gathered to watch. Whispers rippled through the air like the rustle of dry leaves. "Why her?" they murmured. "What does the king see in that one?" The king mounted and spoke quietly over his shoulder. "Hold tight. The road to Thornwall is not forgiving." Mira nodded, clutching the edge of his cloak as the horses began to move. Behind them, her father's manor faded into the mist. Each step of the journey carried her farther from everything she had ever known. Her thoughts swirled with fear and disbelief. What awaited her in Thornwall? A life of honor or a gilded cage? The rhythm of hooves on stone became the pulse of her uncertainty. She looked once more at the horizon, where the king's banner cut through the fog like a shadowed flame. Whatever reason lay behind his choice, it had bound her to a destiny neither of them yet understood. And as the castle walls of her past disappeared behind her, Mira felt the first stirrings of something she could not yet name, a beginning born from rejection, and a journey that would test the depths of her heart. The wind of the northern plains cut sharp and steady against the riders as they left the lowlands of Ellenshire behind. The road stretched endlessly ahead, framed by skeletal trees and distant mountains swallowed by fog. Mira rode behind King Aldrich, her hands gripping the saddle's edge. She had spoken no word since dawn, nor had he. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of hooves and the distant cry of crows. The king's company rode in disciplined silence, armored men with stern faces, banners rippling in the cold. To Mira they seemed carved from the same steel they wore. The world she had known, her father's halls, her sister's voice, her mother's absent comfort, was now nothing but a memory retreating into mist. At midday the convoy halted near a narrow stream to water the horses. Mira dismounted with difficulty, her legs stiff from hours of riding. The king stood apart, his cloak drawn tight, his gaze scanning the northern horizon. A guard approached him. "Your Majesty, we should reach the border of Thornwall by nightfall." Aldrich nodded but said nothing more. His quiet authority commanded obedience without need of force. Mira knelt beside the stream, cupping the icy water to her lips. Her reflection wavered in the current, a pale girl with wind-tangled hair and eyes full of questions she dared not voice. She felt his presence before she heard him. "You ride well," Aldrich said behind her. She turned slightly, startled. "I was taught little of it, my lord. I fear I slow your men." "You do not," he replied. "You endure." "That is rarer than grace." Unsure how to respond, she lowered her gaze. "Endurance is easier when one has no choice." A faint breath of amusement escaped him. "A fair point." His tone softened, almost reflective. "Most who marry into the crown come for power or glory. You did not seek either." Mira's voice was barely a whisper. "Because I was not meant to be seen." He studied her for a moment, as though weighing her words against his own thoughts. "Then, perhaps you see more than most." Before she could answer, one of the guards called out that the horses were ready. Aldrich gave her a short nod and turned away. She watched him mount, the ease in his movements belying the weight he carried. He was not what she had imagined. A ruler carved from stone, perhaps, but with shadows behind his calm. As they rode again, the land grew wilder. The path wound through forests where the branches wove thick above them, turning day into a muted twilight. The chill deepened, and the smell of pine and damp earth filled the air. Mira's cloak offered little warmth. She tried to steady her breath, to keep her thoughts from wandering too far ahead. When a gust of wind sent her hood slipping back, she caught the faintest trace of the king's scent, iron, leather, and something faintly of cedar. It should have frightened her, but it didn't. It grounded her in this strange new reality. As night began to fall, clouds rolled heavy across the sky. The first drops of rain struck the earth like whispers. "We will not reach Thornwall before the storm," Aldrich said, pulling his horse alongside hers. "What will we do, my lord?" she asked. He glanced toward the darkening forest. "There is an old hunting lodge nearby. We will take shelter until the rain passes." Lightning flickered on the horizon, the thunder rolling low and distant. Mira drew her cloak tighter as the riders turned from the road, following their king into the trees. The forest grew darker with every step, the sound of rain thickening above them. Mira's heart pounded, not from fear of the storm, but from the growing weight of the unknown. Behind her, the world of her past dissolved in the rain. Ahead, the shadows of Thornwall waited. She did not yet know that this storm would mark the first crack in the silence between them. The rain came hard and sudden, drumming against the riders' cloaks as the storm swallowed the last trace of daylight. The wind howled through the trees, bending branches until they cracked like whips. Mira's hands trembled as she gripped the saddle, the cold cutting deep through her gloves. Ahead, the king raised his arm, signaling the group to halt. "There," Aldrich called over the storm, his voice carrying even through the thunder. "The lodge lies beyond those pines." The guards urged the horses forward. Mira could barely see, her hair plastered to her face, her cloak heavy with rain. When at last the old hunting lodge came into view, its wooden frame half hidden beneath vines, she felt her breath break in relief. Inside, the air was damp and chill. The guards moved quickly, unloading gear, lighting the hearth, tethering the horses in the adjoining shelter. Mira stood by the doorway, uncertain, water dripping from her sleeves. Aldrich entered behind her, his boots leaving muddy prints on the floor. Without a word, he shrugged off his cloak and hung it by the fire. "You'll freeze if you stand there," he said, not looking at her. "Sit. Warm yourself." She hesitated, then approached the hearth. The flames flickered weakly at first, then flared as one of the men added dry kindling. The orange light danced across Aldrich's face, softening the edges of his stern features. "Have you ever traveled beyond your father's lands?" he asked suddenly. Mira shook her head. "No, my lord. I was rarely permitted to leave. My place was in the library, or at my sister's side." He regarded her quietly. And yet you ride through storms without complaint. I learned early that silence offends no one, she said, the faintest trace of irony in her tone. A shadow of a smile touched his mouth, so fleeting she almost doubted it was real. Perhaps that is why I chose you. Mira's heart tightened. You've never explained that choice. His eyes met hers then, the firelight reflecting in their grey depths. You were not chosen for the court's pleasure, nor for beauty or lineage. You were chosen because you did not beg to be. I don't understand. He leaned back slightly, the flames casting gold across the scars on his hands. Power attracts those who hunger for it. I have seen how that hunger destroys men and women alike. I needed someone who would not feed upon the crown. The room fell into a quiet thick enough to hear the rain beating against the shutters. Mira stared into the fire, the crackle of wood a rhythm to her thoughts. And what is it you expect of me, my lord? To be honest, he said simply, even when it displeases me. The answer startled her. Honesty has never been welcome where I come from. Then perhaps, he said, his tone low, it is time you learn its worth. For a long while, neither spoke. The guards had withdrawn to another room, leaving them alone with the storm's distant growl. Mira studied the fire, its warmth seeping slowly into her chilled fingers. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. You carry weight in your eyes, my lord, heavier than the crown itself. His gaze flicked to hers, unreadable. And you see more than you should. I only see what silence hides, she replied. Aldrich turned his face toward the fire, but his jaw tightened. Then silence will serve us both for now. Thunder rolled once more, closer this time, shaking the rafters. Mira drew her cloak tighter, but the warmth from the hearth was different now, brighter, sharper, laced with something unspoken. As the night deepened, the rain eased into a steady patter, the storm's fury giving way to quiet. Mira felt sleep tug at her eyes, but one thought refused to fade, the king who had chosen her not out of desire but for reasons she could not yet name. And in that uncertain glow of firelight, a fragile understanding began to form, one that would not break easily, no matter what waited beyond the storm. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the earth soaked and silent beneath a pale sky. The air smelled of wet pine and cold stone. As the riders emerged from the forest, the first sight of Thornwall rose before them, its towers piercing the clouds, its grey walls stretching like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Mira's breath caught. The fortress looked less like a home and more like a monument to endurance. The king's men saluted as the drawbridge lowered. "Welcome to Thornwall," Aldrich said, his tone even, though his eyes lingered on her as if to gauge her reaction. She swallowed hard. "It's vast." "It was built to outlast storms," he said simply. Inside, the courtyard bustled with activity. Servants hurried to unload supplies, guards changed posts, and dogs barked from the stables. Mira followed the king through the archway, her boots echoing over the cobblestones. Every face that turned toward her carried the same expression, curiosity laced with disbelief. A matronly woman approached and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, welcome home. And this must be—" "The Queen," Aldrich interrupted. "Lady Mira of House Rowan." The woman hesitated before bowing again. "Of course, my lady." "I am Gwyneth, steward of Thornwall. If you have need of anything, you will come to me." Mira offered a polite nod. "Thank you." Gwyneth's gaze softened for a moment, then flickered toward the assembled servants. "Prepare chambers for the Queen. The West Wing." At that, a few murmurs stirred among them. The West Wing, ancient, draughty, and long unused, was a place few desired to stay. Mira heard the whispers but said nothing. She knew better than to expect comfort. As they ascended the great stairway, Aldrich spoke quietly beside her. "You will find this castle full of eyes and tongues. Some will test you, others will wait for you to fall." Mira met his gaze briefly. "Then I must learn to stand." He inclined his head slightly as though the answer pleased him, then continued forward. Her chambers overlooked the northern valley. Though the room was cold, It held a quiet dignity, the carved oak bed, the faded tapestry of an ancient battle, the narrow window framing a world of mist and hills. Mira traced her fingers along the windowsill, the stone cool beneath her touch. Gwyneth entered with a bundle of linens. "Forgive the state of the room, my lady. It's been years since anyone slept here." "I am not difficult to please," Mira said softly. "That may be true," Gwyneth replied with a knowing smile, "but Thornwall will test that patience of yours sooner or later." When the steward left, Mira sat by the hearth, where the servants had lit a small fire. For the first time since leaving home, she allowed herself to exhale, yet peace refused to come. The image of Aldrich, stern, composed, unreadable, lingered in her thoughts. She could not decide if he was her protector or her captor. By evening, a servant summoned her to dine in the great hall. The vast chamber blazed with torches, the banners of Thornwall hanging like frozen waves of crimson and silver. Nobles and officers filled the tables, their laughter quieting as Mira entered. She felt their stares, some curious, others mocking. Aldrich rose from his seat at the head of the table. "My lords," he announced, "I present to you your queen." The hall echoed with forced applause. Mira bowed her head slightly, willing her hands not to tremble. She caught sight of a few sneering smiles, heard a faint whisper, "The Omega Bride." Aldrich's voice broke through the noise. "Let it be known that respect for the crown extends to her. Any tongue that forgets this will answer to me." The hall fell silent. He sat gesturing for her to do the same. For a long time they ate in silence. Only the fire cracked, and the hum of voices resumed, cautious and measured. When the meal ended, Aldrich leaned slightly toward her. "You bore their eyes well," he murmured. "I have faced sharper ones," she replied, meeting his gaze. A flicker of approval touched his expression. "Then perhaps Thornwall has found its queen." Mira's pulse quickened. She lowered her gaze, unsure whether his words were praise or warning. The days at Thornwall passed in a rhythm Mira did not yet understand. Every morning began with the toll of the chapel bell, followed by lessons in courtly conduct under Lady Gwyneth's careful instruction. By evening she dined among nobles whose smiles were as sharp as their words. Though she wore the title of queen, she felt more a guest in her own crown. The whispers followed her through the halls, quiet, poisonous threads of mockery, the Omega Bride, the king's pity choice. She learned to keep her face still, her steps measured, her voice soft yet steady. Only in the solitude of her chambers did she let the weight of their disdain settle in her chest. One afternoon, as she practiced her address to the council with Gwyneth, a page rushed in, breathless. "My lady, a guest has arrived. She claims the right of blood." Gwyneth's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Before the boy could answer, the doors opened, and the sound of silken steps filled the hall. Mira froze. Standing in the doorway, cloaked in sapphire velvet, was Elara. Her beauty seemed untouched by the journey. Her hair gleamed like polished gold, her smile both graceful and cruel. "Sister," Elara said smoothly, spreading her arms. "Have you no welcome for your own blood?" Mira's pulse quickened. "What are you doing here?" Elara's laugh was light but carried an edge. "I came to offer congratulations. It seems the king prefers humility to grace. I thought it only fitting that I pay my respects." Gwyneth stepped forward. "The queen's schedule does not permit—" "It's all right," Mira interrupted softly. "She may stay for a moment." Gwyneth hesitated, but obeyed, retreating with a bow. When the doors closed, silence pressed between the sisters. Elara circled the chamber slowly, her gaze sweeping over the modest furnishings. "So this is Thornwall. Imposing if a little cold. Much like its king, I imagine." "You should not have come," Mira said. "Why?" Elara's tone sharpened. "Afraid I'll remind them of what they call you? Of who truly should have been chosen?" Mira met her sister's eyes. "You were always meant to be admired." "I was never meant to compete." Elara's smile faltered for a fraction of a heartbeat. "And yet you wear the crown." "I did not seek it." "No," Elara replied, her voice low, "but perhaps you enjoy it more than you should." The words cut deep, not because they were cruel, but because Mira feared there might be truth within them. She had begun to feel something in Thornwall, a quiet strength she had never known at home. Before Mira could respond, the doors opened again. Aldrich entered, his presence filling the room like a change in the wind. His eyes moved from one sister to the other. "Lady Ilara," he said coolly, "I was not told you would be joining us." Ilara dipped her head. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. I came only to see my sister, and to wish your union blessed." The king's tone remained measured. "Then consider it done. The Queen's peace is precious to me. I trust you will not disturb it." Her smile stiffened. "Of course not." Aldrich stepped closer to Mira, his hand resting lightly at her back, a gesture so subtle yet protective enough to sting Ilara's pride. "The road from Ellenshire is long. My steward will see that you are given food and lodging. You depart at first light." Ilara inclined her head, her voice sweet as honey. "As you wish, my lord." Her gaze slid toward Mira. "Until then, dear sister." When she was gone, the air seemed to lighten. Mira exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. Aldrich studied her face. "She sought to provoke you." "Yes," Mira whispered, "and she succeeded." "Do not let her," he said quietly. "Thornwall watches how you stand when others try to make you fall." Mira nodded, though her heart still raced. "I will remember." That night, as the castle slept, Mira stood by her window watching the stars pierce the northern sky. Somewhere below, her sister's presence lingered like a shadow against the stone, and Mira knew that the battle for her place at Thornwall had only just begun. The next morning broke cold and clear, sunlight spilling faintly across Thornwall's grey towers. The storm of Ilara's visit still lingered in Mira's thoughts. She had slept little, her mind circling around her sister's words. Pride, envy, and shame tangled within her like threads too tight to unravel. Yet when the bell rang for the day's duties, she rose without hesitation. Lady Gwyneth awaited her in the solar, quill and parchment, already prepared. "Your Majesty," she said warmly, though her eyes were sharp as ever, "we have much to do today. The nobles expect a queen who listens, not merely one who smiles." Mira took her seat beside the steward. "Then I will listen, and I will learn." Gwyneth studied her a moment. "Good. You have a mind built for more than silence. It is time the court saw that." The morning passed in lessons of diplomacy and restraint. Mira practiced how to read a man's intent by his tone, how to measure kindness without appearing weak. "Power," Gwyneth said, "is rarely loud. It whispers, waits, and chooses its moment." Mira absorbed every word. There was a strange satisfaction in learning these subtle arts, the language of a world that had once excluded her. By midday, the king's summons arrived. The council wished to meet with both rulers regarding new trade routes along the northern border. Mira followed Gwyneth into the chamber, her heart steady but cautious. The councilman rose as Aldrich entered. He moved with that same quiet authority that silenced any room he stepped into. When his gaze found Mira, he gave a faint nod. Neither command nor comfort, merely acknowledgement. She took her place at his side. The meeting began with talk of taxes, shipments, and grain levies. Mira listened more than she spoke, observing how Aldrich weighed each argument before responding. When one noble, Lord Merrick, proposed raising tolls on peasant merchants, she caught the flicker of disdain in Aldrich's eyes but said nothing. Finally, when the debate grew heated, Mira spoke softly but clearly. "If the tolls rise, the markets will thin. Hunger breeds rebellion faster than greed fills a treasury." The chamber stilled. Aldrich turned toward her, his expression unreadable. Merrick frowned. "With respect, my lady, such matters are—" "Of the people," she interrupted, her tone calm but firm. "And a kingdom built on suffering cannot stand long, my lord. My father taught me that much, even in his pride." Aldrich's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, then he said, "The Queen is correct. The proposal is denied." The nobles murmured, some in surprise, others in reluctant approval. Mira lowered her eyes, her pulse quickening. When the meeting ended, Aldrich dismissed the council with a wave of his hand, but as the chamber emptied, he remained by her side. "You spoke well," he said quietly. "I only said what seemed just," she replied. "Justice is often unwelcome in such halls," he said, "yet you carried it with grace." Mira hesitated. "I did not mean to overstep." "You did not," Aldrich said, a faint smile ghosting across his face. "You reminded them that crowns are worn for duty, not advantage." His words lingered in her mind as she walked back through the corridors, Gwyneth trailing behind her. "You did what few dare, my lady," the steward said approvingly. "You earned their notice. Perhaps even the king's respect." That evening the castle buzzed with quiet talk of the queen, who had spoken against a lord and won. Mira said little, but inwardly she felt something shift, a fragile confidence awakening beneath the layers of doubt. Later, as she passed one of the upper galleries, she found Aldrich standing by the window, gazing over the valley. He spoke without turning. "You have a strength they do not see yet, Mira. Do not let them teach you to hide it." "I am still learning what strength means," she said softly. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable but gentler than before. "Then learn it well. Thornwall needs more than obedience, it needs truth." Their eyes held for a heartbeat before he turned back to the window. Mira left the gallery with her pulse unsteady, but her spirit burning brighter than it had since the day she arrived. She did not yet know it, but the lessons of this day would soon be tested before every noble eye in Thornwall. The Feast of the Harvest Moon was the grandest celebration in Thornwall. By dusk, the great hall blazed with torchlight and song, the air heavy with wine and roasted meat. Nobles from across the realm filled the chamber, their laughter loud, their glances sharp. Mira sat beside King Aldrich at the head table, her gown of deep green embroidered with silver threads. She looked every inch a queen, though her heart beat unevenly beneath the fabric. Lady Gwyneth had warned her earlier, "Tonight, my lady, they will test you." The court is not kind to new queens, especially ones who were never meant to wear the crown. Mira had smiled faintly. "Then I must give them no weakness to feed upon." The music swelled as servants poured more wine. Mira lifted her goblet, but drank little. Across the hall she could feel the weight of Ilara's allies, ladies of the southern courts, whispering behind jeweled fans. Their smiles were as sharp as daggers. Lord Merrick, the same man she had opposed in council, rose from his seat, a smirk curling at his lips. "Your Majesty," he said, raising his cup toward Aldrich, "your bride has brought wisdom to Thornwall, they say. Perhaps she will grace us with a word or two to mark this fine harvest." A murmur rippled through the tables. It was not a request, it was a challenge. Mira met his gaze steadily, her fingers tightening around her goblet. Aldrich's jaw tensed, but he did not intervene. "Very well," she said softly, rising to her feet. "If words are desired, I shall offer them." The hall quieted. Mira took a slow breath, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "A harvest is the measure of what we sow. Grain from toil, loyalty from mercy, peace from justice. But when envy is sown, only discord takes root. I pray we remember that before winter comes." A long silence followed. Then, from somewhere near the back, someone laughed, a woman's voice, cold and mocking. Lady Ilara stepped forward from among the guests, her gown glimmering with silver and pride. "Oh, sister," she said sweetly, "such pretty words. Yet surely you must agree that harvests also require good seed. Without noble blood, what can grow?" The hall stirred again, the crowd sensing tension like wolves scenting prey. Mira's pulse quickened, but she did not flinch. "Perhaps," she said calmly, "but even the humblest seed can rise through stone if the light reaches it." Ilara's smile froze. "A clever tongue for one raised in shadows. Tell me, does the king enjoy being lectured by his queen?" Aldrich's voice cut through the air, cool and steady. "I enjoy truth wherever it dares to speak." The nobles fell silent. Ilara lowered her eyes, masking her fury behind a courteous bow. "Then may the truth always favor you, Majesty." Mira sat again, her hands trembling slightly beneath the table. Aldrich leaned closer. "You handled her well," he murmured. "She will not forgive the humiliation," Mira whispered. "She already despised you. Now she fears you." The rest of the feast passed in a blur of music and murmured tension. When it ended, Aldrich escorted Mira through the torchlit corridors. "You showed them strength tonight," he said. "Not the kind born of pride, but of restraint. Remember that." She nodded, though her heart still thudded in her chest. "I did only what I had to." He stopped beside her chamber door, his voice lower now. "And that," he said, "is what makes you worthy of this crown." For a moment, she could not find her voice. There was something in his gaze, respect, perhaps even something gentler. But before she could read it, he turned and walked away. Inside her chamber, Mira stood by the window, the moonlight pale against her hands. The hall below still echoed faintly with laughter, yet she felt far removed from it all. She had survived her first public trial, but she understood now that Thornwall's eyes were never closed. Every smile was a test, every word a blade wrapped in silk. And though she had won this night, she could already sense the storm that would follow. Winter crept early across Thornwall. The skies had turned the color of iron, and a biting wind howled through the ramparts, carrying whispers of unrest. Mira stood at the window of the council chamber, her hands clasped before her, listening to the murmur of voices behind her. The king's advisers had gathered in haste, their tones grave, their words edged with fear. "The northern barons have refused tribute again," Lord Merrick said, slamming his fist upon the table. "They call for independence from the crown. They claim the king has lost the favor of his own bloodlines." Aldrich sat at the head of the council, unmoved. "And what bloodlines do they serve now?" "Their own greed," Merrick muttered. "They say your marriage has weakened the throne." Mira turned slowly, her voice calm, though her chest tightened. "Because the queen was not born of a noble match." The silence that followed her words was heavy. Even those who had grown accustomed to her presence hesitated to meet her eyes. Aldrich spoke then, his tone sharp enough to cut through their unease. "Let them call me weak. Words will not hold a fortress when the walls fall." Lord Merrick scowled. "You would answer treason with patience. If we do not act swiftly, their defiance will spread." The king's gaze drifted toward the map laid across the table, inked lines tracing the wild northern lands beyond the Frost River. "They have not yet drawn their swords. When they do, they will learn how swiftly Thornwall answers." Mira watched him, her heart divided between admiration and dread. She had seen him command respect with silence alone, but she also saw the burden that weighed behind his composure, the quiet exhaustion of a man forever at war with duty. When the council dismissed, Aldrich remained seated. Mira approached. "You've known this would come," she said softly. He nodded. "The north has always been restless. Pride runs colder there than snow. Will you go to them?" His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "I must. The men will not rally without their king." She hesitated. "And if they turn on you? Then they will remember why my house stands, and theirs kneel." Her pulse quickened. "You speak as if victory were certain." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Certainty is a luxury. We rule on resolve." The next days passed in a blur of preparations. The sound of hammers rang through the courtyards, soldiers drilled in the icy air, and banners of Thornwall fluttered against the grey horizon. Mira oversaw the provisions with Gwyneth, ensuring that the stores were filled and the wounded would have shelter upon return. "You move like a queen born to it," Gwyneth said one morning as they walked the outer hall. "I move because I must," Mira replied. "If I stop, I'll remember to be afraid." The steward's expression softened. "Fear is not weakness, my lady. It is the measure of what you value most." Mira said nothing, but her thoughts lingered on Aldrich, on the weight of his armor, the steadiness in his eyes as he prepared to leave. On the morning of departure, the courtyard was cloaked in frost. The king's army stood ready, their breath misting in the air. Aldrich approached her, his expression unreadable beneath the steel of his helm. "You will remain here," he said. "Gwyneth and Captain Edmund will counsel you. Thornwall must stay whole in my absence." Mira inclined her head. "And if word comes that you do not return?" He looked at her then, truly looked, as though seeing the woman behind the crown. Then Thornwall will need your strength more than ever. She swallowed hard. Then you must give me reason not to use it. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps even affection, touched his gaze. He took her hand briefly, a gesture of both command and promise. Hold the kingdom, Mira. I will bring it back to you. She watched as he mounted his horse, the banners lifting like wings in the cold wind. When the gates opened, the thunder of hooves filled the air, echoing long after the last rider vanished into the northern mist. And for the first time since her coronation, Thornwall felt truly empty. The days that followed Aldric's departure stretched long and colourless. The castle, once alive with the pulse of his command, had fallen into an uneasy quiet. Mira walked the corridors of Thornwall with measured grace, though inside each step felt heavier than the last. Every echo reminded her of the absence that now defined her world. At first news arrived often, brief reports from messengers, sealed in wax and heavy with dust. "The king advances," one said. "The rebels retreat beyond the Frost River," read another. Mira clung to each line as if they were fragments of breath. But as winter deepened, the letters grew fewer, the silence between them longer. She began writing her own messages, letters she knew he might never read. Each night, by the dim light of her chamber fire, she let the ink carry what her voice could not. "My lord," she wrote, "you once said resolve must rule where certainty cannot. I have learned the truth of that here. The court tests my patience, the nobles whisper still, yet I hold your name as shield and compass, for Thornwall's peace is my charge now." She paused, her quill trembling slightly. "I do not know if you think of me, or if war has taken even that small comfort from your heart, but know this, I do not fear your shadow. I fear only the silence that follows it." The next morning Captain Edmund brought her a letter from the king's camp. His armor still dusted with frost, he bowed low before presenting the parchment. "His Majesty bade this be placed in your hands alone." Mira broke the seal. The handwriting was steady, though the ink had bled from dampness. "To the Queen of Thornwall," it began. "We have crossed the Frost River. The northern lords scatter like crows, but they are not broken. They strike from shadows and vanish before dawn. Still our men hold strong. I write to tell you I am well, and to ask that you remain so. You command their loyalty through your stillness, Mira. Guard it. When I return, I wish to find the crown unshaken." Her heart tightened as she read the closing line. "You were not meant to be hidden. Remember that, even now." She folded the letter carefully and kept it beside her writing table, where it stayed for nights to come. Time drifted. The court looked to her more often now, petitioners seeking judgment, stewards requesting decisions, the weary asking for hope. She gave them order, if not comfort. Gwyneth often watched her with quiet pride. "You've grown into the weight," the steward said one evening. "I'm not sure I had a choice," Mira answered softly. "When one bears a crown, even breathing feels like duty." Gwyneth's eyes warmed. "Perhaps. But you bear it with grace, my lady, more than most born to it." Then came the storm. On the 29th day of winter's reign, a messenger arrived from the north. Alone, his horse foaming, his cloak torn by wind. The guards rushed him through the gates, his voice hoarse as he demanded to see the queen. In the hall, before the court, he fell to one knee. "My lady, the king's army met ambush beyond the Iron Veil. The banners fell." His Majesty was last seen holding the pass while the wounded retreated. The words hit the room like a blow. The air turned thin. Mira's hand tightened against the arm of her chair until her knuckles blanched. "Is there word of his fate?" she asked. The messenger bowed his head. "None, my lady, only his ring, sent by Captain Edmund. He bade me bring it to you." The soldier extended a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Mira took it, her breath unsteady. Inside lay a simple band of iron and silver, marked with the crest of the wolf. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "He would not fall so easily." No one dared answer. The hall was silent except for the hiss of the torches and the distant cry of the wind. That night, as snow fell thick upon Thornwall, Mira placed the ring upon her hand and returned to her desk. She began another letter, this one without greeting, without expectation. "Wherever you are," she wrote, "I will hold your place until you return. And if you do not, then let Thornwall remember you through me." The ink blurred as her tears struck the page, but she did not stop writing. The bells of Thornwall tolled low across the valley, their sound heavy as morning. For 3 days snow had blanketed the land in silence, as if the world itself refused to speak the words everyone feared. King Aldric was missing, his army scattered, his fate unknown. Mira stood before the great hearth of the council chamber, her hands folded tightly before her. Around her, the nobles argued in rising voices, each man seeking control of the vacuum the king's absence had left behind. Lord Merrick was the loudest. "Without the king, the realm falters. We must appoint a regent to ensure order." "And crown whom, my lord?" Lady Gwyneth asked sharply from her place beside Mira. "The queen yet lives. Her authority stands." Merrick scoffed. "With respect, Lady Gwyneth, she has no lineage to command loyalty from the barons. The crown needs a name they will obey." Mira's voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the noise. "And you believe they will obey yours, Lord Merrick?" The chamber fell silent. He turned toward her, his jaw tight. "I believe Thornwall needs strength, my lady." "Then you should pray I find it," Mira replied. Her calm frightened him more than anger might have. He bowed stiffly, muttering something about duty before retreating. The council slowly dissolved, leaving only Gwyneth and Sir Edmund behind. When the doors closed, Mira allowed herself to breathe. "They mean to strip the crown from me the moment they find reason." Gwyneth placed a hand over her arm. "Then give them none." "Appear in command, even if your heart shakes." Mira met her eyes. "It does shake, Gwyneth, every hour, but I cannot let them see it." Sir Edmund bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, the men who survived the northern battle are arriving at the outer gates. They ask for orders." Her voice steadied. "Bring them to the courtyard. Thornwall will not mourn in whispers. We will stand." By midday the snow had ceased, and the courtyard filled with soldiers, their armor dulled by frost, their faces hollow with fatigue. Mira stepped onto the parapet above them, her cloak heavy with fur, Aldric's ring glinting faintly on her finger. "Men of Thornwall," she began, her voice carrying over the wind, "you have returned from battle, but not from defeat. The king's fate remains unknown, yet his will endures through every oath sworn to this crown. You are his legacy, and I am its keeper." The men murmured among themselves, the sound like shifting stone. She took a breath, her pulse hammering. "You will rest, you will mend, and when word comes, you will rise again. Thornwall stands, not because one man leads it, but because none of you have yielded." A silence followed, heavy and uncertain. Then, from among the ranks, a soldier called out, "For the king!" Others took it up, voices rough and raw, until the courtyard thundered with the chant. Mira's throat tightened. She lifted her hand, forcing composure. "For the king," she echoed softly. When the crowd dispersed, she lingered at the parapet, staring into the endless white of the horizon. Gwyneth joined her quietly. "They will follow you now," she said. "For how long?" Mira asked. "For as long as you give them reason to believe he still lives through you." That night, alone in her chamber, Mira sat before the cold hearth, the king's ring gleaming faintly in the candlelight. She turned it between her fingers, remembering his voice. "Hold the kingdom, Mira, I will bring it back to you." The words haunted her, both promise and burden. She whispered into the silence, "I am holding it, Aldric, but I do not know for how long." Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping snow across the walls like ghosts of the fallen. Yet within those stone halls, something of the king's strength seemed to linger, woven now into the will of the woman he had left behind. The days bled into weeks, and the frost of winter deepened its grip on Thornwall. Mira's mornings began with the same cold routine, meetings with the council, overseeing the men who repaired the walls, and sending out scouts who returned with only whispers of the king's fate. Each letter that arrived, though filled with reports of the northern skirmishes, held no answers. Every evening she would return to her chamber, the silence around her thickening with doubt. Then, on the 32nd day of winter's reign, The ground shook beneath her feet. The earth rumbled like a distant drum, and for a moment Mira thought it was nothing more than the wind. But as the walls of the castle groaned, a distant shout reached her ears. "The gates! The gates are opening!" Her heart leaped into her throat. Without thinking, she grabbed her cloak, rushing through the corridors, her boots thudding against the stone floors. When she reached the main hall, she stopped short. The courtyard was alive with movement, horses, soldiers, and the unmistakable banners of Thornwall rising above the crowd. Mira's breath caught in her chest as she stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the figure riding at the head of the procession. The cold winds parted before him, as if the world itself had made way for his return. Aldrich. For a moment she stood frozen, her mind unable to process what her eyes saw. He was here, alive. His armor was dented, bloodied, but there was no mistaking the strength in his presence. A rider beside him turned and shouted toward the courtyard, "The king returns for Thornwall!" The soldiers cheered, but Mira could not move, not even to breathe. Aldrich's gaze found hers through the throng of people. It was steady, unwavering, though beneath it she saw the weariness, the struggle of someone who had fought and survived. The world around her felt still, as if she were trapped in a moment between two breaths. He was here. He had survived. He dismounted with the help of his men, his boots striking the frozen ground with a finality that sent a ripple through the crowd. The people cheered, their joy raw and unrestrained. But Mira's feet were rooted to the stone, her heart racing as she took a step forward. Aldrich walked toward her, his steps slow but deliberate. When he reached her, he stopped just in front of her, his eyes searching hers. "Mira," he said, his voice rough, as if the words had been held too long. "Tiger?" Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard, trying to find the words that seemed to have vanished. "You came back?" "I told you I would," he replied, his gaze unwavering. Mira's breath caught again, but this time it was not out of disbelief. She reached up without thinking, her fingers brushing the scarred edges of his face, as though confirming that he was truly there, that he had truly returned. He caught her hand, holding it gently in his own. "You have done well, Mira. I knew you would not falter." A lump formed in her throat, the weight of the past weeks crashing down on her. "I did not do it alone." "I know," he murmured, his voice soft. "You've carried Thornwall with a strength that I did not expect, but should have." For a long moment they stood there, facing each other amidst the noise and the celebrations of the soldiers, the people of Thornwall, the court. But in that instant it was only the two of them. "You will not leave again," Mira said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but it held all the fear and relief she had kept locked inside. Aldrich's eyes softened. "Not unless it is for the good of Thornwall, but never again without you beside me." Mira's heart swelled in her chest, the words settling in the quiet space between them. "You were right," she whispered. "I could not do this without you." He gave a slight smile, a rare softness touching his lips. "And I could not have done it without you." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Mira allowed herself to believe that everything they had fought for, the kingdom, the crown, the future, might just be worth the battles yet to come. The air in the great hall was thick with tension. The nobles had gathered in full force, their faces a blend of impatience and curiosity, as the matter at hand was one of life and death for the crown. The king had returned, but not without consequence. The northern rebellion, though suppressed, had left scars that would not fade quickly. Now the barons, with their discontent fresh in their minds, had called for a trial of loyalty. They demanded to know if the queen, Mira, was truly fit to rule beside the Alpha King. Mira sat at the high table, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding beneath her chest. The day had come, the day when her strength would be tested in ways she could not predict. Aldrich sat beside her, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of everything that was at stake. His gaze never wavered from the gathering before them, but his hand, resting lightly on hers, gave her a silent promise that whatever happened, they would face it together. Lord Merrick, ever the instigator, rose first, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Your Majesty, we have seen the strength of your rule, your endurance, your will to see Thornwall through its darkest days. But what of the Queen? She is not of noble birth, she is not one of us. What right does she have to stand beside you?" The murmurs from the nobles swirled like an uncontained storm. Mira's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let the words cut her. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, ever since Aldrich's return, knowing the barons would never let her rule without challenge. Aldrich rose then, his voice steady, his eyes cold and unwavering. "The Queen does not need to be of noble birth to rule Thornwall. She is of noble character. She has earned this crown by her actions, her resolve, and her loyalty to this kingdom. She has proven herself, and I stand by her." The room fell silent at his words, but Lord Merrick was not yet finished. He stepped forward, his tone laced with venom. "And what of her actions during your absence, my lord? While you fought in the north, was it not she who ordered the suppression of those who called for your abdication? Was it not she who silenced dissent with the strength of her own will?" Mira's pulse quickened, the weight of the accusation pressing down on her. She stood, her voice clear as she addressed the room. "I did what was necessary to protect Thornwall. The kingdom's peace was my charge, and I took it up willingly. If that offends the sensibilities of some, then so be it. But I will not apologize for acting in the best interest of this land." Her words rang out, firm and unapologetic, and for a moment the room was still. The nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to respond. But Lord Merrick was not one to back down. "And what of your intentions, Your Majesty? What of your future? Do you intend to remain Queen, or is this merely a temporary alliance?" Mira's gaze locked onto his, her eyes narrowing slightly. "This is no temporary alliance. I am the Queen of Thornwall, and I will rule this land for as long as I am able. My loyalty is not to any one man, but to the kingdom itself. If that is not enough for you, then you may leave." The tension in the hall grew thick, but Aldrich's voice broke through it once more. "Enough. This trial ends here. Mira has proven her loyalty, her strength, and her ability to rule. She will remain my queen." A tense silence followed his proclamation, the nobles exchanging wary glances. Lord Merrick, though visibly displeased, did not dare challenge the king further. Mira sat back down, her hands still trembling slightly beneath the table, but her heart swelled with a sense of victory. She had faced them, the barons who doubted her, and had stood her ground. And now the crown, her crown, was no longer in question. As Aldrich turned toward her, his expression softened. "You did well," he murmured, his voice low, just for her. She nodded, her gaze steady. "We did well." The trial had ended, but a new challenge had only just begun. Thornwall was not a kingdom to be ruled by one alone. It was a kingdom forged in the fire of loyalty, strength, and love, and Mira had just proven she had all three. The first light of dawn broke over Thornwall, casting long shadows across the castle's stone walls. The air was thick with anticipation, yet there was an uneasy quiet that hung over the kingdom. Today would mark not just the conclusion of trials, but the beginning of a new era. A coronation was more than a ceremony. It was a statement, one that would cement Mira's rule and her place by Aldrich's side. Inside the great hall, preparations were underway. The golden banners of Thornwall hung from every beam, fluttering gently in the morning breeze. The scent of incense and fresh flowers filled the air, and servants hurried to ensure every detail was in place. But amidst the bustle, Mira stood still, her gaze fixed upon the reflection in the mirror before her. She barely recognized the woman who stared back at her. The crown of Thornwall, once a symbol of doubt and fear, now felt right, as if it had always belonged to her. Behind her, Gwyneth entered, her footsteps light but firm. "Your Majesty," she said softly, as she adjusted the fabric of Mira's gown. "The people are waiting." Mira took a deep breath, her fingers brushing over the intricate designs embroidered into her dress. "I didn't expect this," she murmured, almost to herself. "This responsibility, it feels different now." "You've always carried it, whether you saw it or not," Gwyneth replied with a smile. "Today is just the recognition of that." The crown was always meant for you. Mira met her eyes in the mirror. I didn't think I would be ready for it, but with Aldrich by my side, I feel... She hesitated, her throat tightening. I feel like I can be the queen Thornwall needs. Gwyneth's smile softened. You already are. The words lingered in the air as Mira turned toward the doorway. Aldrich waited there, his presence as commanding as always, though today his expression held a rare tenderness. He had been by her side through the trials, through every challenge, but today he would formally take her hand in front of their people. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low and steady. She nodded, her heart fluttering in her chest. I am. Together they walked to the grand hall, the weight of the crown settling upon Mira's head, like the first step of a journey that would never end. The hall was filled with nobles, the court, and the common people who had gathered to witness this historic moment. The cheers that echoed through the room were louder than any Mira had ever imagined, a chorus of voices raised in unity and hope. The archbishop, a man of old age and wisdom, stood at the altar, his eyes solemn as he awaited their arrival. As Mira and Aldrich stood before him, their hands clasped together, the crowd fell into silence. Aldrich turned to her, his gaze intense, but his voice gentle. This is our kingdom now, not just mine, not just yours. Together. Her heart swelled as she looked into his eyes, knowing that their shared reign was built not just on blood, but on mutual trust, love, and a determination to see Thornwall thrive. She squeezed his hand in return, feeling the warmth of his promise in that simple touch. The archbishop began the sacred rites of coronation. He spoke of duty, loyalty, and the future of the kingdom. The words blurred around Mira as she focused on the weight of what was happening, not just for her but for the people of Thornwall. When the crown was placed upon her head, she felt it not as a burden, but as a symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she would fight for. Aldrich's voice broke through her thoughts as he whispered, "This is just the beginning." With those words, the crown settled upon her brow, and Mira stood tall, her heart steady as she faced the future. The cheers erupted again, but this time Mira's smile was genuine, a reflection of her own strength and the unshakable bond between her and Aldrich. As they turned to face the kingdom, their people together, Aldrich spoke the words that would bind them forever. For Thornwall. For the future. The finality of the moment was not lost on Mira. Today, she had not only claimed the crown, she had claimed her place by Aldrich's side, and together they would lead Thornwall into a new dawn. The days after the coronation were filled with a strange blend of peace and restlessness. Thornwall, now united under Aldrich and Mira's rule, settled into a quiet strength. The kingdom had weathered its trials, but even as the people celebrated, Mira knew the work had only just begun. The crown, once a symbol of uncertainty, now felt like a living weight, a legacy that would be carried not just by her, but by the generations to come. In the weeks that followed, Mira spent her days in the halls of the castle, walking the cold stone corridors with Gwyneth by her side, discussing policies, trade routes, and alliances. But at night, when the lights were dim and the castle fell silent, Mira often found herself gazing out over the valley, watching the sun set behind the mountains, as though waiting for something more, something undefined to fill the space between her heart and her crown. Aldrich, ever present and steady, was by her side, but his silence had grown deeper. He had returned from the north victorious, but something in him had changed, a distance in his eyes, a weariness that did not fade. The bond between them was unspoken, but Mira could feel it, an unacknowledged weight that neither of them dared speak of. One evening, as they sat before a fire, the soft crackle of logs filling the quiet, Mira turned to him. "Aldrich," she began, her voice quiet but firm, "we've fought for this kingdom, for Thornwall, but what about us?" He looked at her, his gaze unreadable. The flicker of firelight danced in his eyes, but there was a tiredness there, a guarded sorrow that hadn't been there before. "What do you mean, Mira?" "I mean us, together. You and I," she said, her heart in her throat. "This kingdom, this crown, it takes so much, Aldrich. I feel like I've been giving pieces of myself away, and never asking what's left for us. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. I don't know if there's anything left. Not for me, not for you. I've given all that I am to Thornwall, and I don't know if there's more of me to give. Mira's heart clenched at his words. She had seen the sacrifice in him, but hearing him say it so plainly cut deeper than she had anticipated. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. You're not alone in this, Aldrich. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. Thornwall needs us both, but I need you too. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly between them, and in the stillness Mira felt the weight of the future pressing down. They were bound together by duty, by love, and by the kingdom they had rebuilt. But the truth was, there was no blueprint for what came next. They were writing their own story now. Aldrich finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. I don't know what happens next, Mira, but I do know that I'm not giving up on us. Not now, not ever. Tears pricked at the corners of Mira's eyes, but she smiled. Then we'll build it together. Thornwall, and everything that comes with it. They sat in silence then, their hands entwined, the weight of the world momentarily lifted from their shoulders. The legacy of Thornwall would live on, not just in the kingdom, but in the hearts of those who ruled it. The crown was theirs to carry, yes, but the journey they would take together was just beginning. Outside the castle, the wind began to stir again, the first hints of spring's warmth weaving through the cold. The path ahead was still uncertain, the challenges still great. But as Mira and Aldrich sat before the fire side by side, they knew one thing. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The legacy of Thornwall would be their legacy, a story of resilience, of love, and of a kingdom that stood strong against all odds.